Daniel will be moving into your house next month, Linda announced, lifting her wine glass as if she were toasting a promotion instead of claiming a property that wasn't hers to give. The dining room fell into an easy silence, the kind that happens when everyone assumes a decision has already been agreed upon. Emily sat at the end of the oak table she'd refinished herself last spring, her fingers resting lightly around a glass of water, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. The chandelier above cast a warm yellow glow across the plates of pot roast and green beans, across Daniel's satisfied half-smile, across Linda's proud, declarative face. No one asked Emily if that worked for her. No one even looked surprised. Daniel leaned back in his chair, stretching like a man who had just secured a lease without paperwork. "It'll only be for a while," he added casually. "Until I get back on my feet." Back on his feet. The phrase floated in the air like it had been rehearsed. Emily watched the condensation slide down her glass and pool at the base. Her house was 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, just under 2,000 square feet on a quiet cul-de-sac 20 minutes outside the city. She had signed the mortgage alone. 30 years. Fixed rate. She remembered the weight of the pen in her hand at closing, the way the realtor had smiled and said, "Congratulations, homeowner." No one from her family had come that day. Linda had been busy helping Daniel move out of his last apartment after he'd fallen behind on rent. "You've always been the responsible one," her mother continued now, slicing her roast. "You have the space. It just makes sense." Makes sense. Emily nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging a weather report. Around the table, her aunt murmured approval. A cousin asked Daniel which room he wanted. He shrugged. Probably the big one at the back. The one with the walk-in closet. The one Emily had turned into her home office, where she worked late nights to afford that mortgage. Linda smiled as if arrangements were already finalized. "We'll repaint if we have to," she said lightly. "Make it more comfortable for him." Emily's gaze shifted to her brother. 35 years old. Between jobs. Between apartments. Between responsibilities. Growing up, when Daniel forgot homework, Linda called the teacher. When Emily needed help with tuition, she took an extra shift at the coffee shop near campus. When Daniel crashed his car, Linda said accidents happen. When Emily bought her first used sedan, she did it with savings from working 60-hour weeks. The pattern wasn't loud. It was subtle. A tilt of favoritism disguised as practicality. A daughter labeled strong so she could be stretched thinner. "You don't mind, do you?" Linda finally asked, though her tone suggested the answer had already been decided. All eyes turned to Emily then. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the wall clock. Emily lifted her eyes, steady and calm. "If that's what everyone thinks is best," she said softly. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't protest. It was a sentence placed carefully on the table like silverware. Linda exhaled in relief. Daniel grinned. The conversation moved on to football scores and holiday plans. But inside Emily, something had shifted, not violently, not dramatically, just a quiet alignment. Later that night, she stood alone in her living room, the hardwood floors cool beneath her bare feet. The house was still. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh paint from the accent wall she'd finished 2 weeks ago. She looked around at the sofa she'd saved for, the framed photos she'd hung herself, the small crack in the ceiling she meant to fix next month. They spoke about her home as if it were communal property, as if her name wasn't the only one printed on the deed. As if sacrifice was simply her role in the family. Emily walked to the kitchen counter and ran her fingers over the stack of unopened mail. Bills. Statements. Proof of ownership. Outside, the streetlight flickered on, casting a pale glow through the front window. She didn't cry. She didn't slam a door. She simply stood there, breathing evenly, understanding something with absolute clarity. They had already moved her out in their minds. They just hadn't realized she still held the keys. The next morning, Emily woke before her alarm, the pale blue light of early dawn slipping through the blinds and tracing faint lines across the ceiling. For a few seconds she lay still, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of a garbage truck rolling down the street. The house felt the same as it always had, steady and familiar, yet something about it felt temporarily borrowed, as if the walls had already been reassigned without her consent. She sat up slowly and let her feet rest on the hardwood floor, cool and solid beneath her. Every mortgage payment she had made echoed in that floor. Every overtime shift at the marketing firm downtown lived inside these rooms. In the kitchen, she brewed coffee and watched the dark liquid drip into the glass pot, the scent rich and grounding. Her phone buzzed against the counter. A text from Linda lit up the screen. Daniel is coming by this weekend to measure the bedroom. We might start moving some of his boxes next week. Let me know what furniture you can move out. Emily stared at the message, reading it twice, noticing the phrasing. Not asking. Informing. She set the phone face down and poured her coffee into a ceramic mug with a thin hairline crack near the handle. She had dropped it the day she closed on the house, hands shaking from equal parts exhaustion and pride. She remembered that afternoon clearly. The realtor had handed her a small brass key on a ribbon and said, "You did this all on your own." Linda had sent a thumbs-up emoji when Emily texted the news. Daniel had replied 2 days later asking if she could co-sign a loan. At the office later that morning, Emily sat through a staff meeting while a presentation flickered across a large screen. Charts, projections, quarterly growth. Her colleagues debated strategy with polite intensity. She contributed when necessary, calm and precise, her voice steady. No one there saw her as the responsible one by default. They saw her as capable because she had proven it. During her lunch break, she stepped outside into the crisp air and scrolled through real estate listings on her phone, not because she needed to move, but because she needed to understand something. The market had shifted. Homes in her neighborhood were selling above asking price. Inventory was low. Demand was high. A similar house down the street had sold in less than 2 weeks. She studied the numbers, the square footage, the closing dates. Data did not argue. Data did not assume sacrifice. Data simply stated value. That evening, Daniel called. His voice carried a casual optimism that felt almost rehearsed. "I was thinking the back room would work best for me," he said. "It has good light. Might set up a desk in there." Emily leaned against the kitchen counter, her gaze drifting toward the hallway that led to that room. The walls were painted a soft gray she had chosen after testing 3 samples. She had assembled the bookshelf in that room by herself on a Saturday afternoon, tightening each bolt with a small wrench while music played from her phone. That room had held her focus, her late nights, her quiet ambitions. It had never been a placeholder. "That sounds like a plan," she replied evenly. Daniel did not notice the neutrality in her tone. He launched into ideas about repainting and rearranging, about how it would just be temporary until he figured things out. Emily let him talk. She did not interrupt. After the call ended, she walked through the house slowly, room by room, as if cataloging it. The master bedroom with its king-size bed and simple white comforter. The guest bathroom with neatly folded towels. The backyard, fenced and modest, just wide enough for a small grill and a patio table. She paused at the front door and looked at the brass lock, polished and sturdy. They had already decided what her house would become. A solution. A safety net. A shared resource. Standing there in the quiet, Emily understood something with sharper clarity than the night before. If they believed ownership could be reassigned without her voice, then the only language left was action. And action did not require permission. Saturday arrived with a thin layer of clouds stretching across the sky, muting the sunlight into something pale and restrained. Emily stood at her kitchen counter with a legal pad laid flat in front of her, a pen resting between her fingers. The house was quiet, but it did not feel peaceful. It felt observed, as if every cabinet and doorway were waiting to see what she would decide. Her phone buzzed again. Daniel had sent a message that read, "On my way. Bringing a tape measure and a couple of boxes." She did not reply. Instead, she looked down at the numbers she had written on the pad the night before. Estimated market value. Remaining balance on the mortgage. Potential equity if sold within the next 60 days. The figures were neat, precise, unemotional. She had always found comfort in numbers because they did not shift based on who needed what. They reflected reality without favoritism. A memory surfaced, uninvited but clear. She was 22, sitting at the kitchen table in her childhood home, holding an acceptance letter to a graduate program out of state. Daniel had just lost another job. Linda had folded her hands and said gently, "Maybe this is not the right time for you to leave. Your brother needs stability." Emily had stayed. She had taken a local job instead, telling herself it was temporary. Temporary had a way of stretching into years. The doorbell rang at 10 sharp. Daniel walked in without waiting long after she unlocked the door, a confident ease in his stride, as if he were entering a place already assigned to him. He wore jeans and a hoodie, his hair slightly unkempt, but his expression bright. Linda followed behind him, carrying a folder. "I brought some paint samples," she said cheerfully, "just to see what feels fresh." Daniel stepped into the hallway and turned toward the back bedroom. "Good light," he said again, as if reaffirming a claim. He stretched the tape measure across the wall, calling out numbers. 12 feet, give or take. That will fit my bed. Emily stood near the doorway, arms loosely crossed, watching the scene unfold with a calm she did not fully recognize in herself. The room looked smaller with Daniel in it, not physically smaller, but diminished, like something personal being handled with unfamiliar hands. Linda began discussing where Daniel could put a dresser, how they might rearrange the closet. "We can move your desk to the living room," she suggested lightly. "It will not be permanent." Emily felt the weight of that phrase settle in her chest. Not permanent. She had heard it her entire life. When Daniel needed help with tuition. When he needed money for a deposit. When he needed another chance. Nothing had ever been permanent for him because someone else always absorbed the cost. Daniel finished measuring and turned to her with an easy grin. "Thanks for doing this, Em. It means a lot." She studied his face, searching for hesitation, for awareness, for even a flicker of recognition that this was not his decision to make. She found none. After they left, promising to return with more boxes next weekend, the house felt quieter than before, but the quiet had changed. It no longer felt borrowed. It felt decisive. Emily walked back into the bedroom and stood in the center of it, imagining the walls repainted, her desk pushed aside, her routines rearranged to accommodate someone else's instability. She pictured the coming months, shared kitchen schedules, late-night television noise, explanations to neighbors. She saw herself shrinking again to preserve harmony. The image settled something inside her. She walked to the closet and ran her hand along the shelf where she kept old paperwork in labeled binders. Insurance documents. Tax returns. The closing statement from the day she bought the house. She pulled it out and held it for a moment, remembering the quiet pride that had filled her when she first walked through the empty rooms, sunlight streaming across bare floors. No one had handed that to her. No one had sacrificed for her to have it. She had built it inch by inch. Standing there now, in the room her family had already reassigned, Emily understood that silence did not have to mean surrender. It could mean preparation. And preparation, when done carefully, could change everything without raising a single voice. Monday afternoon, Emily stepped out of the office building with her laptop bag slung neatly over her shoulder and her expression composed, as if nothing in her personal life was shifting beneath the surface. The air carried the faint chill of early fall, crisp enough to sharpen her thoughts. Instead of walking toward the parking garage, she turned right and crossed the street toward a small real estate office she had passed 100 times without ever needing. The window display showed recent sales in the neighborhood, neat white cards with bold numbers printed in black. She paused for half a second, then pushed the glass door open. A soft chime sounded overhead. Inside, the space smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. A woman in her 40s looked up from behind a desk and smiled politely. Emily introduced herself with calm clarity, her voice steady, professional. She did not mention her brother. She did not mention her mother. She simply said she was considering selling her home and wanted to understand the process. The agent pulled up comparable listings on a large monitor, pointing out square footage, days on market, closing prices. Homes similar to hers had sold quickly, often above asking price. Inventory remained limited. Buyers were motivated. Emily listened without interruption, asking precise questions about timelines, inspection contingencies, and net proceeds after fees. There was no emotion in her tone, only evaluation. By the time she left the office, she had a folder tucked neatly under her arm and a tentative plan forming in her mind. That evening, she walked through her house again, but this time not as someone defending territory. She walked as someone assessing an asset. She noticed the updated kitchen hardware she had installed last winter, the neutral paint colors that would appeal to most buyers, the way the late afternoon sun poured into the living room through the wide front window. She made a list on her phone, minor touch-ups, yard cleanup, professional photos. None of it felt reckless. It felt methodical. On Wednesday, the agent came by for a formal walkthrough. Daniel had texted earlier asking if he could start moving smaller items into the garage soon. Emily replied that the timing was not ideal. She did not elaborate. The agent measured rooms, took notes, complimented the condition of the hardwood floors. "You have kept this place in excellent shape," she said. Emily nodded. She had. Every improvement had been funded by skipped vacations and careful budgeting. Every repair had been scheduled around her work deadlines. Linda called that night, her voice warm and unaware. "Daniel is excited," she said. "It will be good for him to have stability." Emily listened, letting the words pass through her without lodging anywhere. Stability. The word had always been attached to Daniel, as if he were the one entitled to it. After the call ended, Emily sat at her kitchen table with the listing agreement in front of her. The paper was smooth beneath her fingertips. Her name appeared at the top in clean, printed letters. Sole owner. She read every line carefully, not because she doubted the decision, but because she respected it. Outside, a neighbor walked a golden retriever down the sidewalk. A car door slammed somewhere in the distance. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary evening. Inside, something extraordinary was taking shape, though it did not look dramatic. It looked like a signature waiting to be placed. Emily picked up her pen and signed her name with deliberate strokes. The ink dried almost instantly. There was no raised voice, no announcement, no confrontation. Just a contract, legally binding and quietly powerful. By Friday, the photographer had scheduled a shoot for the following week. The house would soon be listed. Daniel still believed he was measuring for curtains. Linda still believed she was choosing paint colors. Emily folded the signed documents and placed them back in the folder, her movements unhurried. For the first time since that dinner announcement, the house did not feel claimed by anyone else's expectations. It felt like what it had always been, hers to decide the future of. And she had just decided. The photographer arrived on Tuesday morning just after 9, her car pulling into the driveway with quiet efficiency. Emily had already opened every curtain and wiped down every counter until the surfaces reflected light like still water. The house smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and fresh air drifting in through the cracked kitchen window. She had removed personal photos from the walls the night before, slipping them carefully into a storage box in her closet. Frames that once held snapshots of birthdays and graduations now revealed neutral paint beneath them. The living room looked staged but not artificial, composed but not empty. The photographer walked through each room with professional focus, adjusting angles, straightening pillows, suggesting that Emily turn on the lamps to warm the space. Sunlight streamed across the hardwood floors, illuminating the grain in the wood that Emily had once polished on her hands and knees during her first month there. She stood off to the side, watching someone else capture images of the life she had built. It felt strangely detached, like observing a version of herself through glass. Her phone buzzed halfway through the session. A group message from Linda and Daniel lit up the screen. Daniel had found a used sectional sofa online that he thought would fit perfectly in the living room. Linda responded with enthusiasm, already imagining how cozy it would look. Emily muted the conversation without replying. The photographer finished in under 2 hours, promising that the listing would go live by Thursday afternoon. Once the car pulled away, the house fell silent again, the kind of silence that comes after something irreversible has been set in motion. Emily walked through each room one more time, not to measure, not to plan, but simply to feel the space as it was in this exact moment. By Thursday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the listing was active. The agent sent her the link along with a short message that read, "It looks beautiful." Within an hour, there were multiple inquiries. By evening, 3 showing requests had been scheduled for the weekend. Emily kept her expression neutral when Linda called that night, her tone cheerful and unsuspecting. "Daniel is coming over Saturday morning to start bringing a few boxes," she said. "Just small things to get a head start." Emily glanced at the calendar reminder on her phone that marked the first showing at 10:30 that same morning. "Saturday might not work," she replied evenly. "I have plans." Linda paused briefly, surprised by the firmness, but not yet alarmed. "Well, we will figure it out," she said lightly. "Daniel needs to start settling in." After the call ended, Emily stood in the kitchen and let out a slow breath. She did not feel guilt. She did not feel triumph. She felt alignment. On Saturday morning, instead of waiting for Daniel, she left the house 15 minutes before the first showing, locking the door behind her with steady hands. She drove to a nearby coffee shop and sat by the window, watching people come and go while her phone remained face down on the table. An hour later, her agent called. There was strong interest, she said. One couple was considering an offer above asking price. Emily listened, nodding even though no one could see her. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, the spoon clinking softly against ceramic. Across town, Daniel likely believed he was preparing to move into a future that no longer existed. Linda likely believed the arrangement was simply progressing as planned. Emily finished her drink and stepped back into the crisp morning air. For the first time since that dinner announcement weeks ago, she felt something close to relief. Not because the situation was resolved, but because the outcome was no longer hypothetical. The house was no longer a space waiting to be reassigned. It was an asset in transition, already shifting toward someone new. And this time, the decision had not been made for her. It had been made by her. By Sunday evening, the house had received 4 offers. Emily sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, the glow of the screen reflecting softly in her eyes as she reviewed each one line by line. The numbers were higher than she had expected, clean figures that confirmed what she had already sensed. The house was valuable, not just emotionally, but financially. One offer stood out, $15,000 above asking price, conventional financing, flexible closing timeline. Her agent's voice came through the phone calm and assured. "This is strong," she said. "If you accept tonight, we can move quickly." Emily glanced around the kitchen at the pendant lights she had chosen after comparing 5 different styles, at the small scratch on the cabinet door from when she moved in her first set of bar stools. The space did not plead with her to stay. It simply existed, steady and neutral, as if acknowledging that its purpose in her life had been fulfilled. She gave her agent a clear answer. "Yes," she said. "Let us accept." The paperwork arrived electronically within the hour. She read every page carefully, scrolling slowly, absorbing the terms. Closing scheduled in 30 days. Inspection within a week. Earnest money deposited upon execution. Her name appeared again and again, the sole seller. When she signed, the click of her mouse felt quieter than she expected, yet heavier with meaning. Across town, Daniel sent another message. He had rented a small moving truck for next weekend. He added a thumbs-up emoji, confident and unaware. Emily looked at the message for a moment before placing her phone face down on the table. The contract had already been executed. The buyers had wired the earnest money. Legally, the transition had begun. On Monday morning, Linda called earlier than usual. "Daniel is getting excited," she said brightly. "He told his friend he finally has a stable place to land." Emily listened to the word stable again, hearing how easily it attached itself to someone else's comfort. There was no accusation in her silence, no sharp edge in her breathing. She simply absorbed the information as if it belonged to another story. That afternoon, the inspection took place. Emily left the house while the buyers and inspector walked through each room, checking outlets, testing faucets, climbing into the attic space. When she returned, a small sticker marked the electrical panel, noting a minor update needed. Nothing significant. Nothing that would derail the sale. The house was solid. It had always been solid. Tuesday evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in muted shades of orange and gray, Emily stood in the backyard near the wooden fence. The grass brushed lightly against her ankles. She remembered the first summer she had mowed this lawn herself, sweat dampening the back of her shirt as she pushed the mower in straight, determined lines. No one had offered to help. No one had needed to. She had built stability for herself without applause. Her phone vibrated again. Daniel asked what time he could start bringing boxes on Saturday. This time, she did not mute the conversation. She typed a brief reply and then erased it. She typed again, then paused. The truth was no longer theoretical. The contract was signed. The deposit was secured. In less than a month, the house would belong to someone else entirely. Emily slipped her phone back into her pocket without responding. There would be a moment to speak, but it would not be rushed and it would not be emotional. It would be factual. Inside, she walked through the living room, noticing how the late afternoon light pooled across the floor in wide, golden bands. Soon, strangers would place their own furniture there, create their own routines, hang their own photos on those walls. The house would continue, but not for her and not for Daniel. For the first time since her family had reassigned her future without asking, Emily felt the balance shift fully into her hands. The next move would not be about negotiation. It would be about revelation. And she was ready for that moment to arrive. Saturday arrived bright and deceptively calm, the kind of clear morning that made everything look settled from the outside. Emily stood in the empty living room, the echo slightly sharper now that several personal items had already been packed into discreet boxes stacked neatly in the garage. The inspection had passed with only minor notes. The appraisal had come in at value. The buyers were moving forward without hesitation. In 23 days, the closing would be complete. At 9:15, her phone lit up with a message from Daniel. "We are 10 minutes away. The truck is half full already." Excited to finally get started. Emily read the words slowly, then placed the phone back on the kitchen counter. She did not rush. She did not pace. Instead, she poured herself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the quiet street. A few houses down, a neighbor watered flower beds. A jogger passed with steady rhythm. Everything appeared ordinary. At 9:27, a small rental truck turned onto the cul-de-sac and eased into her driveway. Daniel climbed out first, wearing the same casual confidence he had carried for weeks. Linda stepped out from the passenger side, smoothing her blouse as if arriving for something celebratory. Daniel walked up to the front door and knocked once before trying the handle. It did not open. Emily had already engaged the deadbolt from inside. She opened the door calmly a second later, stepping onto the porch before they could enter. The morning light fell across her face, revealing no tension. Daniel grinned. "Ready to make some space?" he asked, glancing over her shoulder toward the hallway. Linda carried a small decorative plant in her hands, as if already contributing to the arrangement. Emily stepped fully outside and closed the door behind her. "We need to talk," she said, her tone even and measured. Daniel's smile faltered slightly, confusion flickering across his face. Linda's expression shifted into mild concern, the kind reserved for minor inconveniences. "What is wrong?" she asked. Emily looked at both of them, not with anger, not with accusation, but with clarity. "The house is under contract," she said. "I accepted an offer last week. It is scheduled to close in 3 weeks. For a moment, the words seemed to hang in the air without landing. Daniel blinked, processing. "Under contract?" he repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means it has been sold," Emily replied calmly. "The buyers have completed the inspection. The deposit has been transferred. The closing date is set." Silence settled over the driveway, heavier than the morning air. Linda's grip tightened slightly around the small plant. "You sold the house?" she asked, disbelief rising in her voice. Emily nodded once. Yes. Daniel glanced at the truck behind him, then back at her. But we talked about this. We made plans. Emily met his gaze steadily. You made plans, she corrected gently. I did not agree to them. Linda's expression shifted from confusion to something sharper, something edged with hurt pride. Why would you do this without telling us? She asked. Emily did not raise her voice. She did not defend herself. With long explanations. It was my property, she said simply. I decided to sell. The words were not dramatic. They were factual. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps toward the edge of the driveway before turning back. Where am I supposed to go now? He asked, frustration creeping into his tone. Emily held his gaze without flinching. That is something you will need to figure out, she said quietly. I have 30 days before I move as well. I am arranging my own next steps. Linda opened her mouth as if to argue further, but the certainty in Emily's posture made the effort falter. There was no negotiation in her stance, no room for reinterpretation. The decision had already been signed, documented, and funded. The rental truck idled softly behind them, an awkward reminder of assumptions made too soon. Emily stepped back toward the door, her hand resting lightly on the handle. I wanted to tell you in person, she said. The house will not be available. Daniel stood still now, the earlier confidence drained from his expression. Linda looked at the driveway, then at the quiet street, as if searching for someone else to correct the situation. No one did. Emily opened the door and stepped inside, closing it gently behind her. Through the window, she watched as Daniel and Linda stood beside the truck, their plans unraveling not with noise, but with the quiet weight of reality. Inside the house, the air felt steady. The shift had finally happened, not with confrontation, but with ownership spoken plainly and without apology. The rental truck was gone within 20 minutes, its engine fading down the street in a low, embarrassed hum. Emily watched from behind the sheer curtain in the living room as Daniel climbed into the passenger seat this time, his posture no longer relaxed, but rigid, his gaze fixed forward. Linda did not look back at the house as they pulled away. When the street returned to its quiet rhythm, Emily let the curtain fall back into place and stood still in the center of the room. There was no surge of victory, no dramatic release. There was only stillness, the kind that settles after a decision has been fully tested and held. Her phone began vibrating before she even reached the kitchen. Linda's name filled the screen. Emily let it ring once. Twice. 3 times before answering. Why would you blindside us like that? Linda's voice was tight, controlled, but trembling beneath the surface. Emily leaned lightly against the counter, her tone even. I did not blindside anyone. I made a decision about my property. You should have talked to us first, Linda insisted. We are family. Emily looked around the kitchen, at the cleared counters and the absence of personal photos. Family had never signed the mortgage. Family had never transferred a payment on the first of each month. I listened when you made plans without asking me, Emily replied quietly. This time, I made my own. There was a pause on the other end, heavy and unaccustomed. Daniel's voice rose faintly in the background, frustrated, asking what they were supposed to do now. Linda returned to the phone. Your brother does not have many options, she said. Emily closed her eyes for a brief second, not from guilt, but from recognition. That sentence had followed her for years. Daniel does not have many options. Daniel needs support. Daniel needs time. She inhaled slowly. He will need to create options, she said. Just like I did. Linda did not respond immediately. The weight of that comparison hung between them. Emily had worked through college, saved aggressively, declined vacations, and built credit carefully. No one had labeled those years as sacrifice. They had simply called her responsible. After the call ended without resolution, the house felt larger, not emptier but clearer. Emily walked into the back bedroom, the one Daniel had measured with certainty. The tape marks were still faintly visible on the wall where he had pressed the metal end against the paint. She brushed her fingers over the spot lightly, then turned toward her desk. The buyers had scheduled their final walkthrough for the week before closing. Everything was moving forward on schedule. That evening, Daniel sent a single message. I thought you would help me. The words were short, stripped of confidence. Emily read them once and did not reply. Help had always meant rearranging herself to absorb someone else's instability. This time, help would not mean surrender. She opened her laptop and began searching for rental apartments closer to her office, something smaller, manageable, efficient. A one-bedroom unit with large windows caught her attention. 1,200 square feet. Top floor. Within walking distance of grocery stores and a park. The rent was reasonable compared to her projected net proceeds from the sale. She scheduled a viewing for the next day. Outside, the sky darkened into deep blue and porch lights flickered on along the street. The house did not feel like a battlefield one. It felt like a chapter concluding exactly when it needed to. Emily walked through each room slowly, not to memorize it, not to mourn it, but to acknowledge it. This space had sheltered her effort, her discipline, her quiet persistence. It had also revealed something undeniable. Ownership meant the right to choose, even when others disagreed. In the quiet that followed, there were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations echoing in her mind. There was only a steady understanding that boundaries, once set, do not require apology. And for the first time, Emily felt the full weight of that boundary resting comfortably in her hands. Closing day arrived with a clear sky and a quiet kind of finality. Emily parked outside the title company office at 9:45 in the morning, 10 minutes early as she always was. The building was plain brick, modest and professional, with a small American flag shifting gently in the breeze near the entrance. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and brewed coffee. She sat at a polished conference table across from the buyers, a young couple who looked both nervous and excited, their fingers laced together beneath the table. The closing agent walked through each document with steady efficiency, sliding pages forward, indicating where signatures were required. Emily read every line before signing, her pen moving in deliberate strokes. With each signature, the ownership that had once defined her stability transferred cleanly and legally to someone new. There was no regret in her expression. There was recognition. 35 minutes later, the final document was notarized. The agent smiled and extended her hand. "Congratulations," she said to the buyers. "And to you as well." Emily returned the handshake with calm composure. When she stepped back outside, the late morning sun felt warm against her skin. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. A wire confirmation from her bank appeared on the screen, the balance updated with numbers that reflected years of discipline and the recent sale. She did not smile widely. She simply inhaled and let the weight of independence settle more fully into her posture. Later, that afternoon, she returned to the house one last time. The buyers had agreed she could collect the final box from the garage before they officially took possession. The rooms were empty now, stripped of furniture and personal traces. Her footsteps echoed softly against the hardwood floors. She walked through each space without lingering. The back bedroom no longer held her desk. The kitchen counters were bare. The walls, once framed with her photographs, stood neutral and ready for new stories. She placed the final box in her car and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the empty living room bathed in afternoon light. This place had witnessed her effort, her restraint, her quiet growth. It had also revealed the assumptions others were willing to make about her boundaries. She did not feel anger toward Daniel. She did not feel resentment toward Linda. She felt clarity. Outside, she locked the door for the last time and slipped the key into the envelope provided by the title company. When the buyers arrived, she handed it to them directly. The woman smiled warmly, thanking her for keeping the house in such good condition. Emily nodded once. "It was taken care of," she said simply. She drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. Across town, her new apartment waited on the top floor of a modern building with wide windows overlooking a small park. The space was smaller, efficient, filled with natural light. That evening, she carried in a few essential boxes and set them down in the center of the living room. The air inside smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. She opened one box and placed a single framed photograph on the windowsill, not of her family, but of herself on the day she first received the keys to the house she had just sold, standing alone with quiet pride. Her phone remained silent. There were no more demands, no more plans made on her behalf. She stepped toward the window and watched as people walked their dogs along the sidewalk below, children laughing near the park benches. The city hummed gently in the distance. Emily did not win an argument. She did not reclaim approval. She did something quieter and far more permanent. She chose her own direction and followed it without apology. In the stillness of her new living room, surrounded by boxes. Yet untouched, she felt something steady and unmistakable. She had not lost a house. She had secured herself. And that was never something anyone else could move into.